Broken free from the shackles of a society built to mark him and those like him as lesser, Frederick Douglass, a social reformer, abolitionist, and author, transcended the odds and fought for freedom against white supremacy, helping lay the foundation for a movement that continues on today, a movement for racial equality. Today I'd like to give a short presentation on the life and liberation of Frederick Douglass. Born February 14th of 1818, Frederick Augustus Washington Bailey, later to be known as Frederick Douglass, was the son of Harriet Bailey, and likely a white slave owner. From a young age, Frederick was separated from his mother and raised by his grandparents, Betsy and Isaac Bailey, until 1826, when he was sold to the Auld family. Throughout his formative years, he was cared for by the woman of the house, Sophia Auld, who sought to provide for Frederick and help him pursue an education. It was Sophia who first taught Frederick the alphabet and the basics of reading and writing. Sadly, however, this dream was short-lived, seeing as Sophia's husband, Hugh Auld, greatly disapproved of Sophia's disposition towards Frederick, and soon after, Sophia had been swayed and would refuse to allow him to read anything, including the Bible. However, Frederick would not let this or any other obstacles stunt his academic growth, and he continued to learn and perfect his knowledge by reading the newspapers and political pamphlets and learning from the white children who had been given educations. It was through his education that Frederick began to question and condemn the very institution of slavery, and sought to rebel against it. There were many reasons as to why Frederick made the brave decision to risk it all and escape to freedom, but what pushed him over the edge was falling in love with a free woman named Anna Murray. He had made multiple attempts, but on September 3rd, 1838, he succeeded in boarding a northbound train riding along the Philadelphia, Wilmington, and Baltimore Railroad. He would eventually reach Hartford County, Maryland, and dressed as a sailor would cross the Susquehanna River with forged papers. He continued by train and ferry until he reached the safe house of abolitionist David Ruggles, and in less than 24 hours he had reached the sanctuary of freedom. Anna and Frederick were married in New York before quickly settling to the abolitionist center that was New Bedford, Massachusetts. It was there Frederick would begin to establish his life's work, and where he and his wife would adopt the last name Douglass. Here he joined and quickly began to advocate for the abolitionist movement, joining various organizations, forming a relationship with more established individuals, and beginning his passion for oratory. He famously gave a speech at the Massachusetts Anti-Slavery Society's annual convention, where he spoke of his life as a slave and the abuse he endured. From there, he continued to lecture and speak out publicly and in writing, beginning to publish for the North Star, the nation's preeminent anti-slavery newspaper at the time. It was also during this period of his life that he wrote and published his first autobiography, Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass, an American Slave, which thrusted him into the public eye all over the country. He traveled to Ireland and Great Britain to tour because he feared the attention he had garnered would put him in a dangerous position with his former master, Hugh Auld. This trip to Ireland was a key factor in further shaping his view of black liberation in America, and improved his fame. In a letter to William Lloyd Garrison, Douglass wrote, "I gaze around in vain for one who will question my equal humanity, claim me as a slave, or offer me an insult. I employ a cab, I am seated beside white people. I reach the hotel, I enter the same door. I am shown into the same parlor, I dine at the same table, and no one is offended. I find myself regarded and treated at every turn with kindness and defense, paid to white people." By the time of the Civil War, Douglass was one of the most famous black men in the country, and recognized his duty to aid in the fight for emancipation and liberation. Prior to the Civil War, as stated previously, Douglass had put in his fair share of effort into expanding the anti-slavery movement and advocating for abolition, but his most notable contribution was the publishing of his first autobiography. This book played a role in the beginning of the Civil War and was effective in three ways. One, it brought to light the horrors of slavery to the Northerners on the fence about abolition. Two, it showed Southerners for their true colors and sparked anger in them for being exposed for their cruelty. And three, it showed America that a black man, when given the resources and education, could write something more profound and more meaningful than any white person could. Douglass was an outspoken advocate for recruiting black men in the war, arguing that those whom the war sought to liberate should have a place in the fight. In August 1861, he published an account of the First Battle of Bull Run, noting that some blacks were already in the Confederate ranks. Once African Americans were allowed to fight in the war and represent the Union, he did his part, becoming a recruiter for some time and even having his 3 sons serve. Frederick Douglass continued to fight for equality into his final days, leaving behind legacy in history, in the political state of our country, and in the work that he left behind. And with that, I conclude my presentation. Thank you very much.